This is Changeling the podcast.
Welcome to Changeling the podcast. Come for the glamour, stay for the vibes. I'm your host Josh, and with us is your other host Puka. Say hi, Puka. What are we talking about today, Puka?
We're making the noises that are made by the fair folk in Exalted 2nd Edition. Or at least I am. I mean, do what you're going to do, but...
Well, I'm making the sound of when... I was going to blank on a joke there. Never mind.
You know what? They probably ate the joke. That sounds like exactly the kind of thing they would do.
Yeah, I need that background that they have where you can just sort of come up with clever descriptions on the fly, not have to do it yourself as a player.
You just took, what was that? Would that be ring damage? If you like?
Yeah, I think so.
Know. Anyway, yes, we're talking about Graceful Wicked Masques, the 2nd edition book that covers them. So I forget, you've played both editions of Exalted, correct? Or is it just one?
Yeah, I've played 1st edition, run 2nd edition. I played with the first book, like the 1st edition Fairfolk book. I've never actually run or played the game I ran of it. The 2nd edition didn't get the Fairfolk involved in it. Yeah.
Okay.
And there's some issues with that, actually. Perspective, but
yeah. Well, I assume some of our comments will be comparative, and some of them will be just the book for what it is.
Yeah, this is the 2nd edition. It is very much a 2nd edition, not a brand new. Like, I can't think of any Changeling books this similar to each other, but there are definitely other games where they were more. I don't know.
Yeah.
Vampire revised to Vampire 20 core book, but yeah, it's definitely a new edition.
And in keeping with the fact that this is not a core book, there were a few moments when I assume were making reference to 2nd edition terms that I either never learned or wasn't familiar with, and I was like, wait, what?
Yeah, so. And we can get into where we're talking about the applicability of this.
Yeah.
Is the thing about that. But yeah, it starts out with a very pretty cover, I think.
Yeah.
The cover is a better looking cover.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
And then a comic, which is interesting.
That's what 2nd edition Exalted does a lot of. A lot of their books are full of little comics.
I don't hate it. I think it would have worked better if they were a connected story or if they were longer, because the little kind of 2-page ones we get at the start of the chapters just leave me going like, wait, what? And this opening one that's much longer gives you a much better sense of the world.
Yeah. I think it still does a good job of giving sort of a feel of things without...
Yeah. It's like, this is what a Fairfolk duel looks like.
Yeah.
So, in this case.
Yeah.
Anyway, written by Alan Alexander, Carl Bowen, and Stephen Leah Shepherd, none of whom I think I've ever heard of. Maybe Carl Bowen, actually. Carl Bowen sounds familiar. There were a whole lot of artists and playtesters.
Yeah.
Maybe not that many playtesters, but a whole lot of artists, which is pretty cool.
And it's published 2008 by CCP. So this was in the era where White Wolf was a subsidiary of that EVE Online video game company.
Yeah, that era of which we shall not speak.
Okay.
I will admit I was very relieved not to see a chapter on the mountain folk in the table of contents. Because that was unnecessary in the last edition.
I think there were 3 Exalted fans very disappointed by that.
Yeah. Anyway, let's flip some pages.
Yeah. It starts out with another little comic.
A joust this time, not a duel. Yep. And the introduction has a Lord Dunsany quote. I realized, like, reading this, I was like, wow, this is such a cool quote. And I've really read very little Lord Dunsany, but he's one of those authors who, like, you can see his fingerprints all over Changeling because he informed so much of the other fantasy literature.
The poem's called The Kith of the Elf Folk.
Right. So yeah, I feel like I need to go back and add him to my reading list. But it's an instructive quote in the sense of, I think, the approach they're taking to what it means to be Fae, in a sense. Where it's like, well, I have no soul to give you, but if you got a soul, one day you would have to die. And it's like, that's the risk of creation. Speaking of which, how's about I just read this opening paragraph?
Sure.
So here's what we are told about the Fairfolk at the very start. Exiles from the wild that surrounds creation, the Raksha are a threat to all shaped reality. taking on physical form, becoming the very thing they despise, the so-called fair folk prey on the fringes of creation, biding their time with unfathomable distractions until the next great crusade rides forth from the formless madness beyond the world's poles to finally end the blasphemy of shape. Which is pretty cool.
Yep. It's your standard how to use this book.
Yeah.
A lexicon, which I think is unchanged from the last one. This is not a complete game.
Yeah. Warning.
It's like Dark Age of Sway in that way. So
the only lexical things that I was kind of unclear about, so they mentioned the abstract tick, which is something that comes up later. But in terms of measuring time in ticks, is that a second edition Exalted thing?
Yes, that's a second edition Exalted thing that they then got rid of in third edition. A tick is 1 second, and every action can go between 1 to 6 ticks in length. And you have this wheel, which they never actually printed, but the fan community figured out this wheel help of like looks almost like a pie or something cut up, and you like have each character on it. And when you take a move, you move them around the wheel for actions. So it's like if you do a slow action, you end up getting like, so you're like, okay, now we're doing tick 1. Is anyone on tick 1? No. On tick 2, okay, you're on tick 2, so you get to do your thing. Oh, you took a like 6 tick actions. You're not going to get to work for a while. This other person's doing a 2 tick action.
But Josh, what kind of pie? Can it be key lime?
I was thinking boysenberry.
Here on Changeling the podcast, we ask the hard-hitting questions.
Yes. Anyway, this abstract tick is doing that in the vague time of... It's like the time of the dreaming. Like if you had to come up with like... And it's supposed to be... I know in the... Okay, it's easier in the first edition, where a turn, this abstract turn, or whatever they called it, would have been like a scene length, roughly. So this is third to a sixth of a scene.
Some number of turns. But the way they get into it later, I actually do kind of like, so I'm with it. But yes, we will see whether this book actually does justice or provides enough information to actually run a game. That is the metric of assessment.
Yep.
And then we get another comic.
I like this one. The guy's like running away. He's like, I'm going to run away. And then like gets caught by the fair folk and who's like, okay, you're pretty fast. Now can you run in that direction? And he's just trying to run away for his life. And the fair folk's like, yeah, this isn't fun.
Toying with mortals.
Yep.
So we get a whole mess of history in chapter 1.
I think this is the most, if you're going to buy this book, especially from a changeling perspective, this is probably the most useful chapter, maybe? I don't know. Or at least for understanding the fair folk.
I guess if you want to have some kind of like tricklets of this that have come down to the Kithane from like the deep past of the Tuatha, perhaps.
Yeah. Or if you've read the history chapter in the first edition book and are confused and want another explanation.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the thing, because compared with the first edition, we get like 8 pages of this very sort of deep metaphysical stuff.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, it sets a very different tone, because this starts with like an ageless nightmare thing. And then the first edition book is like, oh, they are hungry. They want to eat creation. And this is like, let us talk about the distinction between the time that was not and the after.
Mixed with a lot of Sanskrit words used strangely.
Yeah. Such as the Advaita Iraivan, the principle of separation. I do like this, though. I mean, I'm a sucker for this kind of philosophical musing stuff as the history of the Splat. Yeah. And I'm not an expert by any means in Exalted lore, but seeing how it connects to kind of the other stuff that's been established, like the primordials, the heaven and earth separation. There are shades of Dark Ages Fae that I see in here where it talks about like the concern about creation getting organized before they either exiled themselves or were exiled. So all those little pieces, they definitely create the vibe that I feel works best for them.
Yeah. I think this could also work if you are wanting a monologuing philosophical white court Fomorian in your Changeling game. And you could take like this and just adjust the bits that fit the World of Darkness as opposed to Exalted.
And interestingly, you mentioned the Fomorians, but they don't come up in here at all. I did a Control F to look for them.
Yeah. But the Balor.
Yes. So that's in the first edition, if I remember correctly, they separated the Church of Balor from the Fomorians, and here it seems like they've been rolled together.
Yeah.
Interesting. But yeah, they're just the gentry / the Fomorians in Tuatha by any other name. Before the hedge existed.
I'd say more Fomorians than Tuatha in this book.
And I like how it's the period of their history where they were entering creation to do stuff rather than pulling people out of it. So that's kind of an interesting flip.
And it's there's a lot of like we don't understand what's the problem here. Like it's like genuine confusion on the Fairfolk part why creation has trouble with what they're doing to people.
Yeah.
It's like, but this is fun. Why are you upset?
It's not our problem you can't respawn.
Well, they don't even think they know they can't respawn at first.
Yeah. So there's notes about how they were particularly fascinated by these willful, capital W, willful mortals that the gods were taking an interest in. And once the mortals started entering the wild, then that created conflict because how dare they? The Exalted got involved. And I wonder how much of this was... So none of this is in the Fairfolk book from first edition. But how much of it, if you know, was defined in first edition after that book or in second edition up until this one?
I'm not sure. So, I mean, okay. The primordials, I believe, before this book, they were described as coming out of the wild.
Okay.
Informing from it from somewhere. Although this one, they don't. The whole story is also like a Changeling book where it's like, this is our story about, our mythology of... It's not the...
It is one flavor of true.
Yeah. I think this book, like the wild aspects were more expanded upon. The Shinma were in first edition Fairfolk, but
yes,
we definitely expanded on those two here.
Yeah, everything up until the Balorian Crusade felt like material I hadn't seen before.
Yeah.
So
I think they fit together nicely, though, the two things too. It's not like it's like expanding upon.
Yeah, it makes sense. And there's a nice, much more detailed kind of scene setting about what the discussions and moments, almost like you're watching a short film, within the context of the Balorian Crusade. Like, here's the meeting where they all argued. Here's the Thief of Words coming out, bringing them together. Here's Melusine being treacherous. All these sort of events you can refer to within the game.
Yep. And it's a parable, actually, because they're talking about all those different virtues and like the graces, basically. Each one of these characters is reflecting a different aspect of the Fairfolk. So, like their metaphysics and their identity.
Speaking of those graces, on page 29, we learn about them a bit.
Yep.
I guess we don't need to like go into the deep detail. If you haven't listened to the Fairfolk episode that we did in the first half of the season, that will be linked in the show notes, and a lot of the information that is in this book has already been covered in there.
Yeah, expand a bit more, talking about...
Yeah.
At least it seems like more emphasis on there are other graces, but these aren't relevant to Fairfolk, the work and creation. It's like
I'm going to have thoughts about that later, but yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, we have heart, cup, ring, staff, sword to define, respectively, existence, desire, identity, communication, and conflict. We get some of the details about the necessities of surviving in creation. The Fairfolk have to take a shape. They must devour essence, using their graces as feeding maws, with some extensive descriptions about feeding, which is interesting.
Yeah.
But useful. I mean, they are vampiric in a way, so... Their special qualities, they have these formless and immortal chaotic bods, and they shape reality to suit the story they feel they should tell about themselves. Really a lot like the Gentry in Lost.
Yep.
And I'm here for it. They have a capacity for oniromancy, and they are faithful to their word, if nothing else. Through the grace of staff, their word becomes part of their identity, whence oaths and whatnot. I think it's through staff. I can't remember, actually.
Yeah, I think so.
Communication, it makes sense.
Yeah.
And you had mentioned before, I think, did you say that when you were kind of doing your homebrew stuff on the Fomorians and the Tuatha, like, I mean, how much of this did you draw wholesale from?
I did a lot more of the first edition stuff. Like, I take in the graces, but not the virtues attached, because that would get way too confusing. The World of Darkness, especially the Changeling, but even in general, like, they're going to add conviction and...
Those are already words with capital letters.
Yeah, but they're still virtues, and they're actually not that different in Exalted. But it'd be like everybody has 4 of them. No, I'm not. And then heart is willpower, and that's just...
All right.
Yeah. I was thinking that, like, musing would be cup grace.
Oh, well, I like that, though. The epiphanies being tied to each one. That's cool. We get notes on society. Again, there's the nobles and commoners distinction. And I think I spake my thoughts on this before, but like, it doesn't seem like there's any motivation other than whatever the tone of the game is that you want to run, that you would want to choose commoner, because they're just overall weaker across the board.
Yeah, it's kind of like, why is this a...
Yeah.
It's like Changeling, normal nobles, commoners. You're just
Yeah, it's just
not even
fundamentally worse to be a commoner.
yeah.
I mean, I guess you could make that argument for Changeling the Dreaming as well, in some respects, but
You don't get. You still have to put your points in title. Like
yeah,
it's like, oh, you're going to play a noble. You just get more points in everything.
yeah, like triple in some cases.
It's like, oh, it'd be like vampire. Do you want to play a neonate or
A
a
Methuselah.
Malgrave? Yeah, Methuselah. Like your choice.
We'll go through more of that in character creation along with the casts, I think. I did really like the diversions chapter where it talks about like these activities they do to keep busy to unify them. It reminded me of like the Q continuum in Star Trek where they
Yep.
look for ways to stave off boredom through experience and distraction.
I think it was definitely an inspiration.
Yeah. We've all been the scarecrow. So they take shapes, they build freeholds, they form alliances with each other. All of it largely out of curiosity, but also occasionally because they've been exiled or for whatever reason they have no choice. Sometimes they're just stuck in creation.
Well, I think the metaphysics here also play into this to highlight it. It's not even just out of boredom. It's like they don't really have motivations. They're picking up motivations. It's like weird comments about finality versus glamour when you think about it, but it's more like they've taken on a role. They've put on. They're LARPing. Basically,
they're like, I'm going to be a character now.
Yeah, they're role playing. That's their character. They're role playing as a new, and they make a body, and that's their PC.
Or really, it's more a character exists now, and then that character is me, because that's the whatever grace that is, the identity one.
Yeah.
There's some notes about the directions of creation. Much less detail in this instance than we got in first edition, which I'm okay with.
That's because in second edition they had like a full-on wild.
Yeah.
So in first edition there was the Lunars and the Fair Folk, if I remember correctly. I think those were the main books about the wild. Mm-hmm. In Exalted second edition, there's like a book about the wild, and then Lunars and Fair Folk don't have to get into it as much.
There's lots of page references here when it's talking about the courts. So, but yes, very briefly, there's the Winter Folk in the north, the wood aspected ones in the east, the lion folk and the fire types in the south, and the water aspected ones in the west. And the 5 major courts are the jet, the lapis, the pearl, the opal, and the ruby. Mm-hmm. Have you read that book, The Compass of Celestial Directions, Volume 2?
Yes, but I don't own a copy, and it's been a long time. So.
It's probably just all the material they took out of 1E they put in there. And then...
I think they expanded. I remember correctly they expanded upon it.
Right.
Yeah, and it's also this is the whole thing with Exalted as well as every edition. They have not advanced the meta. There is no meta plot. It's always the same year, same time. So, like when it talks about the major courts, these are the major courts of this year, but it's the same in every edition.
Is it the Scarlet Empress has always been gone for 5 years?
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. And then we get some notes on the Church of Balor, which includes both the shaped and the unshaped. More on them in a minute. Mm-hmm. Separate from the courts, still yearning to unmake creation. They have clergy and missionaries. And then the term Templar, which I find really nonsensical in this context. But okay. So,
come on. They need to have like a unshaped bankers. That would be.
They could have said like knights or something, or you know what, if they're going to use the term Second Crusade, which they do, then they might as well say Crusader. But
they could have said Paladin even.
Sure, like there were options.
Mm-hmm.
And that's chapter 1.
Yep.
So it feels like there's much less about the courtly politics because I assume it's in the other book. I mean, there's some politics stuff later on in this one too, but this was kind of the first glimmer of a sense that I kept getting, which was that it felt like this edition really wanted you to play more games in the wild rather than in creation, if that makes sense.
Yeah, which is a interesting choice. It'd be like, let's have a crossover focused with the rest of the World of Darkness Changeling where we should really focus on playing in the dreaming. Like that.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the mechanics are way more focused on being in creation. But yeah,
But there's also that whole section later on where it's like, here's all the reasons why being in creation sucks. And you're like, oh, okay.
I suspect this is the same thing with any book with multiple writers.
Yeah. Anyway, we get another comic. So here we have a village scene. I don't know. It seems like that episode of Batman with the Joker. And
Everyone dies smiling.
Yep.
The grinning fool death.
And there's a Raksha and a Lunar about to come to blows.
Yep. and the Draksha's pretending to be a solar exalted, pretending to be one of the monks for the realm. Anyway,
Complicated.
yeah,
And has nothing to do, presumably, with chapter 2, which, all right,
yeah,
let's talk about chapter 2. Yes, this is
yeah,
kind of like do my head in. This is about the Unshaped, Josh.
yeah.
What's an Unshaped?
Okay, so this did exist in the first book,
Yes.
but greatly expanded upon here. For the fair folk, there's the default state, and then there's this kind they take on to like be in creation. You could think of it as like the Unshape are the even less banality ridden than a True Fae. Like,
Maybe like the Fae souls before they're even attached to a body.
yeah, so there are a series of waypoints, which are locations that have multiple subsouls, which is actually kind of like the primordials are described this way too. They get to a lot of this, and it's a bunch of different locations, and character and NPCs are all the one unshaped that can wander throughout the wild and kind of have their own like story to them. And we get some
Yeah.
example NPC ones later. Do you have questions? Maybe that's a
I mean,
better way.
there's a ton.
Oh yeah, and then the Unshaped can turn into like one fair folk with a charm. Most of your PCs may, at least a lot of PCs may have been in an Unshaped at one point.
Okay, so I'll run down the list of like little bullet points that I make, and you can tell me if these all sound more or less
Yeah.
accurate. so,
Yep.
so first of all, they are unique and categorizable only on a continuum of how aware of and affected by creation they are, which is a direct line from the book.
Yeah. Yeah. At least if you're talking about like over time.
Yeah.
Today they could be a traveling circus, and then later they decide to be a city.
Mm.
But
Sure. So they don't have intimacies, and again, is that a second edition Exalted term?
yeah, it's a second edition term. Intimacies are second edition had these things where it's like the things that are important to who you are, kind of.
Yeah, I mean, I grokked the meaning at least, but they don't
Yeah,
have them. They have what are called imperatives instead,
yeah,
attached to the graces that they form, and they also have emanations, which are lesser raksha, as subsidiary intelligences that count as powerful nobles.
yeah. That bit's very much like the primordials.
Okay.
As well. But,
Ultimately, they're quasi-sentient locations or quasi-sentient mobile freeholds. I'm
yeah,
struggling to see how it looks in a game, let alone how to mechanize them. But like, I mean, operationally, it seems like there's a section later where it's unshaped as antagonists, and I'm like, yeah, what else would they be? Like,
yeah. They don't have a. I kept looking. I was like, wait, did they have a section on PC Unshaped? Because that would be.
yeah, like I have no idea how you would even begin to play this as like a group of players around a table, which is
And
fine.
technically, under the character creation, you could make a shape
You
that
could,
would become unshaped, but
yeah.
don't really know how to play that.
That being said, casting them in the storyteller's only role, I think they do a really good job of setting up what the stories look
Mm-hmm.
like where you engage with them, which they frame as quests.
Yeah,
So your shaped characters begin at a waypoint adjacent to the unshaped and proceed through 4 tests, one for each grace. And in the end, the shaped ones will probably get a reward, and both parties will get experience points in theory.
yeah,
So it's like its own little epic mini narrative, which is nice. That makes sense. That's a nice
yeah,
little one-off kind of
yeah.
adventure.
They're in D&D terms, traveling dungeons in the abstract sense.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And there's a lot of potential here, I would say, to adapt into Changeling the Dreaming as well. I mean,
yeah,
we've talked before about how the idea of a sentient freehold and sort of manifesting sentient chimera that, I don't know, go out and learn things and do whatever and then get folded back into it. Like, those are all kind of
hmm
nifty ideas.
yeah. With a bit of tweaks, you could have like an unshaped in Changeling that wanders in from the deep dreaming into the near dreaming, and just causing problems.
Well, and you have denizens, like
Yeah,
maybe denizens could be extrusions of some deep dreaming
yeah,
thing. There are some examples. There's the golden mirror and its emanations, the salt that cuts, which is represented in artwork by tits, and the whisper in the leaves, and swar, the city of formlessness
hmm
constrained, which is, I think, my favorite, just from the name alone. It's like,
yeah. There's a Swar in Wraith the Oblivion too. Anyway,
I think it's also just a city in
yeah,
the world. I did think, because it's supposed to be located in the north and it's the only one that's in creation and it's buried under ice or whatever. Is this the same as that crystal city from Dark Ages Fae that everyone was fighting over? Possible connections.
Yep.
It is worth bearing in mind that this book came out like the year after Dark Ages Fae, and I imagine some of the same people might have been involved, but
we'd have to check the names. I'm not sure.
They probably read it at least.
Yeah.
The authors for this. Do you have any favorites among the emanations?
Whisperer in the Leaves.
I mean, they're all interesting. Like, they're trippy,
Yeah.
but they're interesting.
Yeah, they all make me go, I read it, and then I'm like, I want to make a new one.
Right, exactly, yeah. My favorite is The Indefatigable Wanderer, solely because it introduces the Way Grace, which I don't know why I love it so much. Maybe it's my inherent piskiness, but I'm glad that it did make its way in.
Yep. And they give them their charms, which are just...
Extravagant birthday reward.
Yeah. Okay, so it doesn't say to make these as player characters, right? I don't know how you would run a chronicle of these player characters, but mechanically, there's as much support for making unshaped player characters as there is for shaped.
It would be a nifty thing. And probably someone's done this, where it's like you make a character and then you discover you're only an emanation, and like, what does that mean? It's like a weird psychological horror kind of thing around that.
You're all just the emanations of the same unshaped.
There you go. That's why the party got together.
Yeah, and then which one of you becomes the one player character? Anyway.
So overall, I do think this probably should not have been chapter 2.
Yeah, that's an interesting choice. Like, the first book had it later.
Yeah, it should have been like the penultimate chapter. I mean, I would have taken this as the mini splat instead of Mountain Folk in the same position in the book.
Well, they do have this just with way less detail in the first book.
Right, yeah.
It's like mostly a sidebar.
Probably, I mean, because I think chapter 2 in the old one, was that the geography one?
Yeah.
I don't remember. But yeah, it's a little bit weirdly placed.
Yeah, it's almost like going through, it's like, well, unshaped turned into shape, so like your character, this is who you were. No, this is not your prelude. Yeah, everyone does a prelude as an unshaped before you start.
Oh, that would be... I mean, that would be interesting. But I don't think this chapter really gives you enough structure to do that.
No.
And I'll get to my gripes about the storytelling chapter when we get there. But
yeah.
In the meantime, chapter 3.
This art style was very different for this comic.
Yeah, it was all different comic artists, right?
Yeah, I think so.
And I'm looking at a black and white PDF, but was this in color?
I don't think so, no.
Oh, it's a shame. Looks like it'd be really nice in color.
Yeah.
So yes, a very meditative comic to open with Araksha musing on how creation defends itself against her.
Mm-hmm.
Chapter 3. The key difference that stands out to me between the Fairfolk and other Exalted characters is that they are pretending to be unique beings with unique motivations and personality and memories.
Yep.
But the character itself, the idea of being a character, is a deception, which is kind of this meta commentary on gaming in a sense. And they created it to facilitate interaction with creation. But
like in first edition, in terms of Changeling, if you think of it in terms of Changeling the Dreaming, any Fairfolk can spend a point of willpower to change their legacy.
Groovy.
To some other legacy.
Into it. So we go through the different character creation steps as usual.
Yeah.
Start with a concept, the role, not the occupation, the role the Raksha plays in the drama that they act out, from birth, which is not the way that mortal birth happens, through figuring out your caste, which is the same as in first edition, possibly joining one of these, adhering to one of these philosophies, where we have the Church of Valor that seeks to undo creation and is associated with valor, the Glittering Train that sees value in creation as food and is associated with compassion, which is kind of ironically named, the Duchy of Mirrors, who are tied to creation and associated with temperance, and the Hungry Wolves, who are tied to conviction and just kind of follow their whims. And here's the motivation and intimacies thing. Okay, so this is what you're saying, the legacy change. There you go.
Yep.
And then attributes, the commoner noble divide. I really like, because if you're a commoner, you don't get a starting dot, so they do have to say what it looks like if you have a 0 in anything, so you get like details about what does it mean to have 0 wits.
Yeah, there's this range of what's playable, and it feels like it goes both directions
Yes.
beyond where you should, with the commoners up through the unshaped.
Yeah. So maybe noble just is the best option.
And even then, like, it's just like the first edition, it's wildly, it's not even like doing the vague nod to game balance that most White Wolf stuff does. Like, I think they still have the birth background and stuff. It's like, oh, just take this background and it makes you better at everything.
Yeah.
Okay.
I did look at how those are slightly adjusted, which I guess we'll get to in the next chapter. But there's the abilities, which can be cast abilities or favored abilities, and that gives you a bump.
Yep.
It's a little bit convoluted, but I think I followed the math.
It's all the Exalted, not that these are Exalted, but all the Exalted types get this kind of thing where there's cast things, and except for the Lunars get cast attributes instead of abilities because they're funny. But
I've never done Lunars, so I'm not as familiar.
You might like them, actually, of the ones.
Yeah, I'll stick with these and Sidereals. Those are my two. Yep. Advantages, there's the virtues, the graces, the lures associated with each grace, which they give more detail on in this edition than in the first, I think.
Yep.
Each cast is associated with one of them. The nobles have kind of two in relation to each other, so they have two major graces. And there was a thing about, where is it, intimacies. Yeah, a Raksha begins with a number of intimacies equal to his compassion. So does that mean you essentially have legacy? You have a number of legacies equal to your compassion?
Intimacies aren't really legacies. They're like people or things you care about.
Touchstones, to use the V5 parlance.
Yes.
Okay, that makes sense.
And I think there is probably a transition because, like, I know Onyx Path took some stuff for some of their things from Exalted.
Gotcha. You get your charms. Most of them are designed to facilitate shaping actions / assumptions. And I don't remember in the first edition, I know that there were assumption charms, and that was kind of like the term used to take on a form in creation. But here they keep talking about assumptions plural, as though you have like a closet full of shapes that you might put on.
Well, you can take multiple charms.
Yeah, I don't remember seeing it spelled out quite so explicitly in first edition.
This does a lot more spelling things out explicitly, I think.
Yeah. And then you do your finishing touches, spend some preview points, ask yourself those spark of life questions like, what goals do you have for your shaped existence? And do you plan to roleplay feeding on mortals, or do you just want to keep a herd of mortals and ignore the details? That's how you get into the mindset.
That's an interesting touch on safety mechanics, I think.
Indeed. First edition had a nice sidebar on, or maybe even a whole section on, like, here's how to hash out feeding. Like that.
Yeah.
That is useful.
I love how both of them in the point things just give a dash for your heart grace point cost because you can't buy heart grace with freebie points or XP. So, like, why?
Wah, wah.
But just the way they write it is like,
yeah. The summary charts are actually quite useful in comparison. But we need to figure out what all these traits mean. So we'll turn to first another comic where this lady breaks up an orgy and then gets betrayed, and then chapter 4.
She's not a fair folk. I figured that much. I don't know what she is.
This is Melissa Iran art, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely. I can't tell you for 100% sure, but it sure looks.
It looks like it. Yeah. Seems like a fun time though. Anyway, so yes, traits. Fair folk specific traits beyond the ones in Exalted. It is kind of like, I mean, this book is dramatically shorter, and you can really see where they condensed a ton and cut stuff and offloaded stuff, and where they expanded. So this is an example of like, just go look in the core book.
I still want to write craft glamour like on a Changeling character sheet. I'm very confused.
So craft glamour is just like facility for shaping Gossamer, or?
Yeah, it's like, to shape stuff. It's
all right.
Over the top thing. It's like,
oh, here I see.
Yeah.
Okay. The physical manifestation of shaping effects.
Yeah, a glamour. It's kind of like a chimera in Changeling-ish, but maybe not as necessarily as solid.
But because shaping effects so often are you like narrating what's happening, and it says that a lot of the charms around that demand a craft roll. So it's kind of like you can't just say this is what's happening. You have to back it up with your skill when you're in creation.
Yeah. And if it and again, this is like if you need a roll for it. Like, there's definitely times you're like, it doesn't really matter. It's fine, don't roll. but
you're in the deep wild with an unshaped. Just talk.
yeah, and you're just doing it just for fun. You're not trying to attack or
Yeah.
have any specific effect with it.
So then we get the graces, which are not just traits, insists a sidebar.
Yeah.
They are forged by the ambulatory nothing that is a newborn Raksha to create simulacra of virtues and willpower. They are disguised thereafter as manifestations of those things. Exhausting a virtue exposes the Raksha a bit more as an alien thing, but they can forge graces for others as well, including Creationborn, which now that I'm thinking of it, also gives me a Lost vibe.
Yep.
As in Changeling the Lost vibe.
Yeah, you could definitely make someone into a partial Fae with this,
Yep.
even if they're not Fae-blooded.
By forging their cup grace into an actual cup or
Yeah.
other object.
And you can do it to other Exalted too.
Hey. So yes, cup is associated with desire, ring with purpose, staff with interaction, sword with conflict. Awesome. I think like in terms of the dots, like the descriptions of each level, I think it is pretty much in line with first edition. It's a little bit, it's worded slightly differently. Like I noticed things about this version emphasizes the alienness a little bit more. If that makes
I
sense.
didn't catch any of the standard World of Darkness copy paste between edition bits.
Yeah.
They like it's like write this in your own words a lot.
Yeah. There's a lot of paraphrasing. Like you can see where it came from, but it is genuinely reworded.
Which is I think one advantage of the book. Like if you're really interested in this, getting both editions just to give you the two perspectives on the same things could be helpful if one's confusing.
And at certain points, they complement each other well.
Yeah.
So backgrounds are largely the same, except they took out the details on cult, and then they made birth more aligned with commoner and noble. It determines how many assumptions.
It's still the background of why would you? It's more important than generation and vampire. Like you got to take this. Like
Oh, and the style background is based on your feeding graces rather than whatever the original thing was.
Yeah. It's complicated formulas for each level. Each level gives you different formula for.
Yeah. But it also, the second edition it does feel like a more developed world because it is.
Yeah.
So having the sort of like casual use of terms and references to things, it is a reminder that like the Fairfolk have been out in terms of game publication for a while.
One thing second edition Exalted really did in general was very nailed down and standardized in terms. And it's like everything has keywords that mean specific things, and they all
especially the charms.
But like the whole rules, like this book has a few extra keywords. But then like the core book will also have all these keywords that just tells you like these words mean very specific things, and you can
like unholy.
Yep. It's very inspired from like collectible card games and things like that, I think.
I guess that's fair. There are some disadvantages, 5 of them, we're told. So each grace has a lure, which is like a temptation that draws them in. Compassion has the curse of hubris. Conviction has the curse of alienation. Temperance has the curse of namelessness. Valor has the curse of meekness. And willpower is the curse of stubbornness. And the lure is like something, like a guess that you have to do if you encounter it. So like your compassion lure might be always help others or always give help when asked is the example they have.
And then if you go through it, you fall into the bedlam states for each virtue.
Yeah. And I wonder, do you think that this could work in dreaming? So when you've talked before about doing bedlam triggers or whatever, I wonder if you could have a temptation in the same way that you have an antithesis, or a lure in the same way that you have an antithesis.
That's a good idea. I mean, I wouldn't want to get 5 categories of them based on...
No. But it would be...
But yeah.
Like a character would... I mean, you can kind of do that with antithesis already. Like you could have always give help when asked but it makes more sense as like an oathy thing that you have to follow.
Some of that falls into frailties sometimes.
It's true, because you do have the compulsion frailties. There's also notes here on death by calcification, which is like banality.
Yeah, and you could translate this to be losing essence. I think it's almost like gaining a point of banality.
Yeah.
So,
and then the bindingness of oaths, traditional Fae stuff.
Yep.
We close with the same old casts, where you have diplomats and their associated ones, if you're a noble, courtier, imperial raksha, and scribe. Entertainers, and then luminary, issue, and ornamental raksha. Warriors and their associated ones, anarch, xia, and cataphract. And workers, who have their associated panjandrum, artisan, and strategos. Lots of terms from like random classical languages that have very
Yep.
specific meanings that don't make a lot of sense here, but all right.
Which, I mean, if they were of Earth instead of like the exalted setting of creation, it would make a little bit more sense then, because they're like, oh yeah, their entire existence is just their appropriating existence itself. So,
not that appropriation is good, but
no,
it would make more sense.
Neither are the fair folk.
This, though, I mean, second edition is solidly out of the realm of this might be the prehistory of WoD. So it's like, there's no excuse to say like, oh, well, maybe this is where that idea came from. It's like, no, you're just.
But I mean, they kept that from first edition, all these names and stuff.
That's
but
true,
they could have changed the names. Yeah, that's one thing. Like I keep wanting to do, but it's a huge project. I don't know if I'll ever finish it. But like, do a book on this in Changeling, like ideas from this, but.
Add it to the list.
One thing is just fix it. I have it. Oh no, I've got a lot of work on it. So it's a lot.
But
like just changing all the names where they're problematic is a lot of work.
Yeah, there's a lot.
Finding the right words.
What I do like in here with the Ascendant ones, though, is that they do actually have the details for inversion if you are kind of split between these two castes and you flip. And I think that might be useful for narrating through switching courts in Dreaming, especially for nobles. My overall comment on the character creation chapter and the traits chapter combined, because they're really two halves of a whole, they are roughly the same length and content as in first edition, or at least I didn't see much variation, and they're quite trim. But I will ask, because it has been a minute since I've seen the second edition Exalted character creation rules, if I have ever seen them at all, would you say that this is enough to distinguish Fairfolk characters from the others in terms of how this process shakes out? Or do you think it doesn't matter so much?
They have things there's like, it falls under the general template of an Exalted character, but they're weird and different.
I guess I'm thinking of it like this. I have a set number of dots for backgrounds. I don't know what the core backgrounds are. Given that I have all these new ones, am I going to be like, oh, how am I going to decide between spending them on this or this? Like, do they split off enough or too much or just right?
Yeah, I mean, there's still all the ones in Exalted you can still take, except for it says otherwise. Like, they go through that all. I mean, most of the backgrounds that aren't really covered here are just like the standard World of Darkness ones. That's
okay.
So, like, resources, I mean, you got Gossamers, you don't need any resources.
Yeah. The important mark of distinction is in the next chapter. First, we have some kind of weird, messed up Beauty and the Gentry Beast courtship comic. So once you get through those 2 pages...
That's problematic?
Yeah, it's a little weird. Then we get reality shaping in chapter 5, which in first edition was just this like chunk of about 15 pages before the charms, and now is its own 35-page chapter, which is much more complex.
Although at the same time, it's very similar. It
made sense the whole way through, which I was happy about.
It took the first edition rules and made it fit into second edition with ticks and stuff. But
yeah, so we start with like the structural stuff about space and time, where in the rather unformed wild, space is determined by waypoints of whatever scope, linked by journeys, and there's a sidebar to help conceptualize this. Time is built... I'm actually going to read where is it? There's a little paragraph on time that's useful. Here we go. Games centered around creation-born characters generally express time, from most precise measurement to least, in ticks, actions, scenes, downtime, and stories. When the Raksha interact with each other away from the disruptive influence of the creation-born, they experience a more fluid and often leisurely passage of time. Games involving Raksha in the wild generally express time in abstract ticks, shaping actions, tales, downtime, and stories. So then there's like details about how to equate those to each other.
Yeah.
I think that in and of itself gives you enough sense of like how you should be thinking about a timeline in a very abstract way.
And I think some of this actually can have inspiration for your Changeling games. Like waypoints and journeys. Change that to, I don't know, waypoints. There's not really a term for it in Changeling. And trods or something. Like it's... You have a waypoint, which is a place where things happen. And then a journey is like, you're traveling to somewhere else. Like,
Yeah.
and if you decide, so if you're like, oh, something's, how can we get there? And you can do it like as a bunch of dots with lines connecting if you want to map it, but they can shift over time anyway. And you can be like, well, this is going to take you, if you follow this path, it'll take you 7 journey, like you go through 7 waypoints. So it's like there are 7 scenes to get there, like 7 interesting scenes. If you do it as, okay, you as a storyteller, you want to go, this is supposed to be easy to get to, so it's be like 3 waypoints. You have 3 scenes that'll happen before you get there.
Yeah.
Versus 7 scenes versus 20 scenes, right?
And I would absolutely use that for a deep dreaming anything, because it's like, yeah, time does not matter.
Yep.
Interestingly, in first edition, there's more like specificity about like roles and stuff that you would do, but I like it better like this, where it's more open-ended.
Yeah, but it also talks about like if they were using the system to change things, like there's 20 waypoints, about 20 waypoints from the border marches, 60 waypoints to the middle marches, and 20 waypoints of the deep well before reaching pure chaos. I'm a little bit confused by in pure chaos. There's no waypoints. I'm like, what?
Yeah, sure.
That part, like I remember getting that. I'm like, oh.
At some point, it should stop making sense. That's good.
Yeah. It's like, okay, your journey no longer is possible unless your location's now drifting. What?
Yeah. So then we get some shaping actions, which feel more concretely defined here in terms of like there's default roles, there's more support for non-charm shaping. We get a separation out of the types of actions there are from like, what is it, fantasies, alterations, restorations, and evocations, each of which has thorough examples and connections to other parts of the game, which was great. Like you really get to see how to make this work.
Yep.
It talks about when to roll and when not, and what those things look like differently, as well as a full page bar on wild stunts.
Yep.
Into it. It seems like there's a lot more flexibility in terms of dice pool too, because in the first edition, wasn't it only 1 attribute associated with each type? And here it's 3.
I think so, yeah. Yep.
That's nice. A little more flexibility. And then probably the biggest relief in the entire book is that they actually give you like a step-by-step to shaping combat that like parallels non-shaping combat. And it's like step 1, step 2. What is it with the actions list where it's like, so on page 121 now, going back a bit, is that the cost where it has like the parentheses and it has numbers slash something?
Okay, the first one is how many ticks it takes.
Okay.
I can't remember what the second number means. I'd have to.
Is it like a dice?
I think that might be
pool?
Yeah, I can't remember what it means. None versus. I think it's something to do with initiative. I can't remember.
I'll have to go look at the core book again and see. Yeah. So we get this like rubric and helpful sidebars on attacking with investigation, on entanglement. What I don't love is the mathematical formulae. Whenever I see a division sign in one of these books, I'm like, come on.
That's just from the core book. That's how your DV is calculated.
I know, but your heart DV is... How would you even... If you were speaking math, how would you even say that?
Manipulation plus highest capability plus weapon defense all divided by 2.
No, that's the easy one. The heart one is the tough one.
Willpower divided by 2 plus dodge plus essence if it's rated at 2 plus all divided by 2.
Yeah, like
that's just complicated. Yeah, that is what. Oh, it's because willpower is 1 to 10.
Right.
Well, your attribute. This is very exalted, but
Anyway, that's the part I don't like. All the narrative stuff is great. I mean, all the sorts of things about like what does it look like to lose ring combat or lose sword combat.
Can I just? This was not Exalted the Fair Folk, but this was Exalted 2nd Edition. Gave me my only actual breakdown that took me several months to recover from running Exalted 2nd Edition.
Oh dear.
Because the player characters, it was a fun game started. They were heroic mortals, then they all exalted, and then they like found a town that they were taking care of. They eventually were running a kingdom, and then the realm, which is like the man coming after them with like a huge. And I was like, okay, this is like it's escalated to the point a full legion's coming for you. And I sat there for several days just trying to plan this mass combat using the mass combat rules, and it broke me.
I can believe that. Does not sound pleasant.
It's just like, I can't do this. Sorry. And like the game ended. I just had to end the chronicle right there. I couldn't come back to it.
Oh,
I just couldn't. Yeah,
unfortunate.
yeah. I could play Exalted. I don't know if I can storytell
Yeah,
first edition, but not second. And third edition's at least is brain hurty. So
yeah. But I mean, points for covering all the bases. Like they kind of
yeah,
talk about the difference in meaning between hold, possess, and own when it comes to like
yeah,
charms, what it means to shape attack against the creation born or against waypoints.
yeah.
Like all of the little details. I imagine this came out of, if not playtesting second edition, all of the gripes people had about first edition and
Yeah,
like questions.
it's just the
So,
style of second edition. Like,
mm.
I swear some of the second edition Exalted writers could pump this out like in one draft. Like it's
Well, so like something I noticed, for example, and I don't know if you can speak to this, but in the losing different types of combat. So losing staff combat in this edition, it says that you can't do staff shaping attacks.
yeah.
In first edition, it was a -4 penalty to all shaping. And it's like,
Hmm.
I can imagine shaping combat previously was everybody going all in on staff until they beat down that
Hmm.
virtue, because then it's like you mess them up for the rest of the combat. But
Yeah, no, there's definitely more thoughts about it. I don't know how balanced this system
mm,
is or not, or play tested, but there's definitely thoughts on it and worked on it. But
it feels more condensed, weirdly.
yeah,
Like, because then the rest of the chapter, it's much expanded with all the weapons that you have.
it's terse. I'd say it's very.
Yeah,
One thing is like Exalted. There's basically one kind of combat normally. Now there's four kinds of shaping
right.
combat on top of that, and they have all their own little differences. So then they're trying to get rigorous about it, and it's a lot of text, like dense text.
Yeah. I think it would be good to like try one per session
Hmm.
and see how it goes.
Yep.
Anyway, then we get weapons. Any favorites?
Oh, I'm trying to remember.
I liked Milieu, where you seduce someone with their environment as a
Yep.
cup attack.
Oh, actually, my favorite is Commandment Lens.
Oh, I liked that one too. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I did also like the harness of twisted words. That was kind of a lot of these would be nifty, like thought exercises for treasures or chimerical
Yeah.
stuff.
Like all this stuff's just treasures, and it's weird.
Well, and speaking of treasures, because we also get other forms of grace magic, the
Yeah.
glamour sorceries, that are represented by the artifact background, things that are shaped out of a grace, where you get
Hmm.
adjurations or oaths shaped from staff, behemoth creatures from sword, oneromancy spells from cup, and treasure objects from ring. And good lords, the damage bonuses on these.
I mean, this is the game that's famous for like, oh, I
I
roll
know,
25
but it's.
dice of,
Uh,
and it's on the same scale as revised
I'm sure.
as C20. Like it's on the same scale, damage scale,
Plus 16 damage, my ass.
but that's
Yeah.
plus 16 shaping damage. So that's not quite the same scale. But the
Nevertheless, it is still eye-watering to.
yeah,
I really want to just watch a shaping combat and be like, oh, that's how.
yeah, that's the one type of. Oh no, I did try running this on play by post.
Oh gosh. Well, actually, that's good because that gives you more time to
Yeah.
sort things
And
out.
it was a I was running I didn't finish it. People sort of dropped out. It was
Oh,
but it was like they were all in one big freehold trying to take it over, and the player it was like PvP shaping combat through play by post.
all right. Well, I could get into that. We close the chapter with some freehold mechanics, along with ones that are mentioned are in the Wild Book. I don't know if there's anything useful in there, but here we
Mhm.
get information about basically all the stuff that used to be in the charm descriptions for creating parts of a freehold has been
Mhm.
offloaded here, which is a wise move.
Yeah, because that's remember I was telling you before, and you're like, oh, you sort of skipped it in the first one. I'm like, but that's where the book is.
Yeah, now I know. I'll be
Yeah.
honest, I skipped most of the ones in this read as well, but that's coming soon. Um, so yeah, we have
No,
the
but now it's not in the charm section, so you can at least read that.
right,
Part.
yeah. So we have the arcane redoubt, the heart of the freehold, formed by the heart, the fountainhead from ring that makes the freehold live, glory from cup that gives it its majesty, the stronghold from sword that gives it strength,
Mhm.
and the throne room from staff for society and swearing fealty and whatnot. There's a little sidebar here on cysts and penance, and it's so gloriously gross and wonderful, and I love it. Reminded me of goblin fruit a little bit, the cysts. Bone fire instead of balefire. Like,
Mhm.
what's not to love about this stuff?
I feel like the system penance thing, like there's something that I can't remember what it was called in Book of Freeholds that it felt like it was inspired by this.
Maybe. Yeah. It's interesting how like the stuff around place is what interests me, like captures my attention the most, the unshaped and the environment stuff, and how shaping combat messes with it.
Yeah, if you want like really detailed, I mean, turning this into Freehold, more expanded Freehold rules than even within Book of Freeholds, you could get some ideas here for like very large Freeholds.
Yep. So I feel like I grasp shaping combat a little bit better after reading this chapter than I did before. At the very least, I'd like to try it for all of its Sandman-esque riddle contest kind of feel.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it ties into stunting too. Like when you're trying to stunt, you're like giving descriptions and stuff. So it's like tactically, you're trying to think about what kind of story you're narrating.
Yeah.
It's like, I think we need to do a seduction now. Oh, no, we need to do this as a negotiation or a combat or a...
You have been seduced by the animate gazebo.
Yep.
So then we're going to have to talk about chapter 6.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so let's get through the easy stuff first. We start off with an explanation of Gossamer, the dream stuff solidified to a purpose in creation. Some can resist glamour, some cold iron can damage it. And then mutations, which are permanent or transitory bonuses to one or more, I guess, assumptions that are that a Raksha may take on, balanced out by the fact that they impact essence. It reminded me of like the way cybernetics are often handled mechanically, where it like gives you a bump but then limits your power stat or something.
Yeah.
And then the thing about keywords that you were saying, we have some charm keywords like what assumption means and evocation, shaped only, unshaped only.
Yeah. I don't know if you saw the combo rules mentioned in here too.
I saw the mention, and I know how combos go, but I wasn't gonna try and wrap my brain around those.
Yeah, it's like you can only put together charms in the same action with certain combinations and you have to buy things anyway.
So here's my question.
Yep.
I did not count the number of charms. I did count the number of pages, and how, by all that is holy, are there even more pages of charms in this edition than in 1E? How is that possible?
Well, they took all the 1E ones and then they added some new ones.
Oh my gosh.
And here's a fun thing. I'm fairly certain I remember this correctly, but I didn't go through and do the math on it. I probably should have. I'm pretty sure there's a bunch of charms that you're allowed to take under the rules, but your character would not have the essence or mutations ability to actually use.
Womp womp.
Like that is one of the big problems with this that was pointed out. It's like, the math doesn't work. Like just for playing it, you just can't. It's like you bought this charm that you can't use.
Yeah.
Great.
Well, I'm all about getting rid of math.
Yeah.
So.
Because they have lower... It's like they made the essence costs fitting Solar Exalted, but these have like the lowest essence pools of like any of them. And all these things like take out of your essence pool. And anyway.
Because it sucks to be in creation.
Yeah. Also, like anytime... This is true, and it doesn't... I don't know if it says it here explicitly, but this is true in general in Exalted. When a charm is active, you've committed the motes to it.
Oh.
And you can't recover those until you release the charm.
And some of those charms last a while.
Yeah, including all your assumption charms, which you could then turn into mutations, but that has other implications.
Because consider also there's the note earlier that you can do one shaping action per scene while you're in creation.
Yeah.
And so many of these are like shaping actions, essentially. So
yeah, it just doesn't work mathematically on this.
So maybe fair folk in general, as charm-slinging adversaries or allies or whatever, are kind of best to just show up, do their one thing, and then bow out until they're next needed. All right.
But they can come back as something very different next time just by using different...
As a gazebo. A seductive gazebo.
That bit you said was true in first edition. It's just second edition. It's just the fact that it's like, oh, I bought these charms and I can't use them. Especially the ones that stack with each other. And it's like, but I can't stack them unless I get high enough essence, but it doesn't have that essence requirement as your...
Well, I'm gonna just fly through descriptions of all 75 pages of these. And if you have any favorites you want to shout out.
It's the same as the last. I like the ones that let you... I think they still have the one somewhere that lets you destroy your own charms.
Okay.
Which is handy. It shows this because if you did the mutation bit, if you read that, you can see why you might want to.
I will definitely say the flowcharts are easier to read than in first edition.
Yeah.
So we start with the excellencies. Are they a second edition only thing?
Yeah, that's a second edition thing.
That's what I thought.
So those are like what they do is they saw like between you'd have different charms from like different abilities or whatever types, and they all just sort of do the same thing. Like they had dice or they let you re-roll or whatever. So they just turn them into excellencies instead of having to rewrite them over and over.
Okay. So we start with those, and then we get into assumption charms, the charms of the mask and Nirakara. They work, if not a little bit differently. There's a lot more sort of information in the opening about things you need to bear in mind around them, which is useful, and the shapes that you take. There's a whole dingy load of those. Lots of elemental and bestial forms, some emotional stuff. Then the charms of Nirguna, the heart. We have name charms to define sense of self. Bedlam influencing charms to resist bedlam, so basically defensive. Serenity charms, which combine the old dodge and resistance ones, I think. And yeah. Then for Dharma, the cup, we have cup combat charms. Feeding charms to mimic ravishment. Addiction charms and world-shaping charms that draw on those respective qualities of the wild, and virtue-shaping charms. And our virtue-shaping charms, are those the ones that let you forge graces? That's I take that back. That's staff has them.
Oh, I thought that was ring. Okay, maybe it was first edition.
I think they moved them because I was going through both at once, and they moved a lot out of ring into staff, something like that. They rearranged a little bit. Staff got more love, I feel, in this one. So yes, then you have Nirvishesha, the ring. You have ring combat charms, body strengthening charms, which are more identity strengthening rather than actual physical body, creation and wild-based crafting charms, and boy howdy, can you craft a lot of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Then we get Nirvikalpa, the staff.
And by stuff, we include other player characters.
Yeah.
You can make them. Just want to throw that in there.
Yes. So for Nirvikalpa, you have the staff combat charms, the wildlife birthing charms to make little servitors for yourself. The grace forging charms are in here. And society forging charms and domination charms that govern interactions. I like society forging charms as a class. Lastly, we have Nishkriya the sword, which has sword combat charms, and then transitory and permanent mutation charms to shape that bod. I like how as you go, the descriptions also get shorter and shorter and keep referring back, similar to like werewolf gifts. They're like, no, just go look at the other one. It works the same.
I do. I want to list my favorite name of a charm.
Yes,
which is not a bad charm in general. Is translucent dream sheathing technology.
That is a pretty good one. I like that. I also like Grace of the Infinite Revolving Spheres.
Yep,
I thought that was kind of cool. I mean, they're all fun.
It's like, how do we take Exalted charms names and make them more pretentious?
Yeah. We also have at the end the shaping stances, the martial art kind of things. The all-consuming god monster style for workers tells the tale of a creature ruled by passions and appetites. The diplomat's laughing monster style is a merry prankster epic. The spirit-twisting obsession style for entertainers plays into cruelty. And the warrior's world-devouring warlord is exactly what it sounds like. And those are the charms.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of them.
And you were just mostly listing the charm categories. Each of them would have like 10 charms under each.
Well, exactly. I mean,
and all of them have dependencies on each other, and like they have all the
I didn't want to narrate through the flow charts.
No, but there's complicated flow charts. I just want the listeners to understand that there's complicated flow charts.
And I'm sure someone has gone through and figured out the way to min-max like any of these things to function together.
That was like what Exalted discussion was back then.
Yeah, I remember. That's part of what turned me off to. Anyway, so yeah, I mean, I'm sure that if I were actually playing in a game, I would read this much more carefully than I did. But broad overview, it's fun. And that brings us into the very short final chapter 7.
Yep. I like this comic.
I hated this comic.
Okay.
Well, I loved the art style. I loved the comic up until the last 2 panels. Because it's like, fisherman meets an oyster elf who speaks in shapes. Fisherman is warned off by another mysterious figure. Fisherman doesn't want her to go, And then suddenly it cuts back to him telling the story to his grandchildren, and he leaves it on a cliffhanger and asks who wants preserves. It's like, wait, what? It's just weird and random. But anyway, storytelling. That's how not to tell a story, Grandpa.
Well, or are you talking about the storytelling chapter? What you're saying?
Both.
Yeah. I don't disagree with every word written here, but
it's not bad. It's just not
insufficient.
Exactly. It felt more to me like an overflow chapter or like a Book of Storyteller Secrets chapter rather than actual advice on storytelling this game.
Yeah. I guess we've had worse storytelling advice for Changeling.
Yeah. We certainly had better though too. So we get like a brief notes on the moods of alienness and madness, some pointers on stories and creation, which is where you get the whole "this is why creation sucks for the fair folk" kind of stuff. Interactions with all the other splats. Sidereals are probably the most interesting to me, and I think that was probably what I said last time. Here we do get some of the notes about like the courtly politics and shaping for dummies. So like I said before, it seems like they really want you to be telling stories in the wild rather than in creation. Yeah. And I do like the sample quest at the end, but it does kind of rehash what we already had in chapter 2, where it's like you go through one test at a time for each grace. So yeah, it's fine, but I think it missed the trick of the first edition's chapter, because that one, it had all the information about character creation, how to determine like interactions between characters, how to plot out your story. That I think was more useful to me. I think they go well together. Like you were saying before, having these side by side is good. Yeah, on its own, it didn't feel like solid enough advice to me. Yeah. And it's so short. It's like 12 pages.
And it's funny because this edition actually did like mechanically try to make them more viable in creation. So it's like, but then yeah, the advice is not to. Okay.
Yeah.
And then we have a meh comic, although
I mean, talk about cliffhanger.
Yeah. The Fairfolk character does have a blouse made out of hands that move. That was strange.
Yeah, a little bit weird. And then like Swole Jaguar in a loincloth.
Yeah, I think he's a god.
Isn't he just?
Or he might be a lunar, I'm not sure.
Was this like supposed to feed into... I assume lunars came out before this for second edition.
No, it came out after. I have it on my shelf.
Oh, okay. So then did this cliffhanger then feed into a comic in that?
The number, not that I remember. The number is after. I don't know if it came out. You know White Wolf number.
No, all right.
I think a lot of these, like Jaguar, like there's a lot of named characters in Exalted, and I'm not the biggest knowing all the meta plot. The signature, like all the different NPCs throughout it and stuff.
Right on. In any case, then we get a much trimmer index because they did not list every single charm in.
Yep.
They also included lots of little Easter eggs, which I appreciate.
Oh.
So under J, you have Journey, pages 15 and 113 to 114. Then you have capital J Journey, see her in a smoky room. Kevin and Tim Tom, see Moppets. Moppets, see Dr. and Mrs. the Monarch.
Yeah, or Moppets. Okay, yeah.
Under U, the union of Brian and Melissa, 9/27/08. So I assume they got married. So it's cute.
Yeah, this is also the Exalted the edition where they had a book on like set before the usurpation, which had courier company that was very dexterous, and they like worked at night, called the Dexterous Midnight Runners.
Oh no. I do also see that Hungry Like the Wolf is in the index, and it says see Duran Duran. So they clearly had their tongues firmly in cheek.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, also my favorite emanation of an unshaped might be him who hurls axes, because that's fun. Anyway,
I have the character sheet too. I just like how many dots you get.
There's so many little boxes too. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So the boxes next to abilities where you mark like what's your like specialty?
No, I know that. I'm talking about like cup soak rings.
Oh, those are your health levels.
I know, there's so many health tracks. And then there's more very lush art on the back.
Mm-hmm.
That's the book. Final overall thoughts?
Yeah, for your Changeling the Dreaming game, this is definitely low end on like
necessity.
I would definitely put if you're going to pick a book to read for changing the dreaming ideas or pulling things in or prehistory or whatever you want, go with the first edition book. And if you have lots of money and time on your hands, you could get this book to clarify some things that you didn't get from the first book?
I'd almost say it depends to, like, if you're running a deep dreaming game, I feel like this one might be slightly more useful, but only very slightly.
I think the first one without this one would be better than this one without the first one. For that even.
All right, yeah. So, I mean, I dig them both. Like, I'll admit I did not give a careful enough read to play an actual game of it, but in terms of looking through... So, when I was looking for dreaming parallel stuff, I put 3 things on my list as things that would stand out as being useful. So first, highlighting the alienness and the madness of the Fae, I think works as deep history for Changeling. Even if we ditch the world details because this is no longer the world of darkness's prehistory, it still works for Changeling to say this is what the Fae once were in some sense. Second, the dreaming game stuff, like I can see a lot of little mechanical quirks that I could pick and throw in, descriptive hooks that would be great for NPCs, story structures, odd freeholds, mysterious characters, like all of those little elements. There's a lot of inspiration in here, which is also true of the first edition book. And then third, putting this next to the first edition and then also thinking about the other Fae flavored games really kind of made me look at the connective tissue between them. So I was thinking about Dreaming and Lost and Dark Ages all in parallel to this. And I think what it boils down to for me is this narrative of the epic past, the slow diminishment into the present, but then in the exchange gaining more and more humanity. If I had to point to a theme for this game, and maybe all of those games, because we only get moods here, we don't really get themes. If I were to like make some kind of thematic alignment, it would be the sense of there's some value to being human, or at least from a human perspective, there's some truly horrific, cruel, and incomprehensible things about being a Fae. That, I think, is the lesson that the games teach. They're trying to illustrate that contrast. When we talk about Changeling the Dreaming as a horror game and how the Fae can actually be major pains in humanity's butt, that's what I think about. I mean, it's a much more direct example here because they're entering creation and messing everybody's day up. But that thread of monstrosity balanced against humanity does come through for me.
Oh, yeah. For some people, too much.
Yeah. I may have waxed too poetic in my notes on that last time.
I meant too much monstrosity in this one.
Yes.
And I love the history chapter where you're like, we used to be so much less human.
Yeah.
We miss those days. Now we care about things like linear time and cause and effect and like locations.
It's just the worst.
Yeah.
I like how the unshaped resent the shaped for being so like sullied by creation as well.
Yep.
Anyway.
Yeah. So I think that's a good sum there. So
take us out.
Yeah. So you can if you want to talk to us about Exalted or anything else, you can go to our Discord at discord.me/CTP. You can also email us, podcast@changelingthepodcast.com. You can leave us a comment on our website where all our episodes are also posted, changelingthepodcast.com. You can also go to our YouTube page, Changeling the Podcast, where all our episodes are uploaded as well now. And please like and subscribe there. That helps us a lot. We have also a Facebook page, Changeling the Podcast. And if you're on Mastodon, you can send us a toot, changelingpod@dice.camp.
And all of the links will be in the show notes to this episode.
And once again, I'm Josh.
I remain the shaped known as Puka.
And remember, the best diplomats are weird owl people.
People living just to find emotion, hiding somewhere in the night.
In many ways, the book Graceful Wicked Masques is itself, to use the game term, a journey connecting two waypoints that represent the reader's life before they open the book and after they close it, which are different for everybody. For Josh, this was the journey that connected a slingshot firefight in an all-hours cheesecake factory and the pensive light before dawn off the old dock at the Cape. For Puka, the journey was one that led from Dorito-related mouth activities to the sweet and subtle agony joy of a Wham playlist on repeat. Should you pick up this tome and let yourself be shaped through it, we're curious to hear what waypoints you experienced before and after, and what kind of shaping combat you're inspired to do as a result. Reaching out to us on our Discord at www.discord.me/CTP is always a great idea, and we are especially grateful for those who help us continue to bring madcap content to the masses via our Patreon at www.patreon.com/changelingthepodcast. The fair folk who brought you this episode include Derek, Dorcadas, Elorus, Iabol, Oreo, Roscaboose, Sandjigger, Sija, Terry Robinson, Tricerabeth, and Victor Torre. Extra special thanks go out to them in the middle marches. In closing, we hope that this has been an acceptable return to the airwaves after our summer hiatus. Stay tuned for additional forays into the world of the Fae, and until next time, keep on dreaming.